So, Carole, the fact that we're all here speaks volumes, doesn't it? She is a most remarkable person and poet. And here we are, all of us together in Mi'kma'ki, the unceded and ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people, to celebrate the wonderful new book of poems, Lucent Poems, that Carole's written and published. And we did try in December, but COVID happened. And that's why probably, we are masked, many of us, and anxious probably, and living through difficult and dark times with war and pandemic and global climate issues. And these poems are the thing that make us believe and hope and carry on. And you will love them, I know. In 2006, Carole invited me to attend a workshop she was giving to learn how to write poems. And I did. and I've worked with her, and she's mentored me ever since. If you would like to know the impact that her teaching had on me, you could read Doing Time, which they sell here, which is Carole's a kind of almost a memoir or a story of the way she teaches in prison, teaches poems to people who perhaps never before even thought about poetry, many of them, as you'll learn in this book. But the kind of vividness and strength that is her character comes through so strongly in that book. And Carole, we celebrate with you today the launch of Your Turn.
Now, how lucky am I? And thank you all my friends for being here. So generous of you. I'm very, very grateful. I know it's not easy to come out at this time. I really, really appreciate it. I'm going to start with a poem. It was an experience I had in Gatwick Airport, and I thought, I've got to write this down. The poet that I mentioned, I was told it was pronounced Milosz, Milowz. I'm the queen in line, intent on giving my order to the young man at the sandwich shop who misunderstands me. Most of the servers and cleaners at Gatwick have an accent. Name tags fastened, passport stamped not so long ago at the border. Our orders taken by Alexis and Jamals and Hassans. Can I ask where you're from? Not Rimouski. You can ask, he says. And then, Poland. As if we're both graduates at an English conference, I ask, how absurd, do you like Miłosz? A Miłosz is Lithuanian, the young man tells me. And we're off on a conversation about Szymborska, Herbert, Zagajewski, the heartbreak of the astonishing word. Behind me, other royalty are impatient, as if he and I have hung our harps upon the willows and every tree in the midst thereof. We're thirsty in this billboard desert of mirages where a broken fountain leaks into sand-colored muck. But I persist. Do you like England? When I ask for fruit, he thinks I want juice. Ah, an orange you peel, he says, and goes to the back room to get one. It is the driest season in a land of gold and silver bars where rioters grab through shattered windows and the rivers of Babylon are brackish and fevered, and young men give away what they don't yet have. For you is free, he says, so recently employed, wanting no money to change hands. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? To the teenagers in my writing circle at the psychiatric ward. To the delicate girl who kept getting thinner, thin as smoke from a cigarette a fault line in her green eyes. To the young man whose father slipped into his bed, his fury trapped, a coiled cobra. It was hot. Sun pounded windows that couldn't open, but something opened when one girl said to another, "Wow, you wrote that." To M, who said, "I can write about cutting, but I don't want to upset anyone." Kids with piercings, scars, tattoos, boys with tangled curls, shaven-headed girls. The staff unlocked the doors and marched you through. Though the world had twisted like a chicken's neck, your anger, I believed uncensored you could begin to discover who you were. "You're making me happy," Dee said one morning. "You love poetry, don't you?" "Don't come back," was a message the red-haired nurse left on my phone that night. She was tired. I made more work for her. How else explain why she was annoyed each week I showed up? "If she treats you that way," the floor psychiatrist said, "imagine how she treats the kids. Like wrecks that skid when the brakes fail." In that place where nothing was savored, no was the word, but you know that. You whose words were rough and frail, and so often out of favor. Our own way. For all those, like me, who have not gotten the instructions right. Excited when calm is called for. Who, when clearing the path, secretly look around for what avenues are open and easier to navigate. Who believe the afternoon a fresco, not quite set. Anything could happen, yet complain it's too warm or not warm enough. Always the afterlife of afternoon. Who elicit advice and then resist it. As Darwin's father begged his son, "Don't go to the Galapagos. It will all end in failure." Who plant failure. Who feel guilty when they fail to entertain even the dog. He looks so bored and disappointed. Who trust the alarm only to find it was time to go off later, so miss the very thing they thought they'd trained for. Who pretend that the greed in their hearts is going on behind their backs and they don't know a thing about it. Who are beside themselves, trying to get out of their own way, giving the lie to ecstasy, standing outside ourselves. What is it I want? To have faith in my life. There, I've told you. Now it's your turn. I'm going to read a poem about Harriet Schlossberg. Many of you knew Harriet, so it's such a privilege to be able to read it, about someone that you knew. She was like a sister, an older sister. We had a lot of fights, but like sisters, we knew we were family, and I do miss her. Harriet. "What you think matters doesn't matter," she said. She shook her head, her smile cheerier now that she was 6 months dead. I'd lost my trowel, was digging with a shovel, but I'd hit stone. She leaned into what I can only call my pride and said, "Pride won't help you." As if ambition were a scarf, she folded mine smaller and smaller, then let it slide into the hole I dug. "A sweater would keep you warmer," she said. I must admit, a little smug, but not grave. She laughed. And even stronger than sun and more penetrating her chagrin, "The way you compare things." I'd been planting asters, those coppery blossoms that last all summer, shiny as pennies, but the soil was poor. "In spirit," she said. Of course, she knew all I hoarded and all I hoped for. In the early sun, I was standing on a slope that got little sun, recounting one by one barriers I hoped to surmount. This moment is the only entrance, she said. Count it. The only one. And this is a poem about Peter Langille. And many of you knew Peter Langille too. You know, years after I was remarried, and I hadn't spoken to him or seen him, I had a dream about Peter Langille. I woke up really upset. Why was I dreaming about Peter Langille? And then his oldest son, Colin, called me the next day to say that Peter had died. I really think he was saying goodbye. Do you remember his voice? That twang, it's unmistakable. Tree Man was the name you gave yourself. The entire trip might have taken one long afternoon when we drove out of the city, water a glistening silver ribbon unfolding beside us, and me in my party dress scrunched beside you in the ladder. The name meant harmony, though everything about that day was discordant. Sun in our eyes, wind that roughened the road and strong-armed our direction. You pointed out elms you loved, shapely things, and jack pine that grows in the scrappiest soil and never reaches the age of its red cousins. You knew hemlock timber was more durable than cedar, the timbre of your voice a language in itself, filled with the twang of birdsong, rakish cedar waxwing, rat-tat-tat of woodpeckers. You too were a drummer on full moon nights, and like them could disappear into trees, your favorite game. You didn't rest, even when we pulled onto the shoulder of the road, trickster at cards, something always up your sleeve after all. It was afternoon when we got on the Trans-Canada. All you offered was to transform my life. We took our wish list with us, left our jobs, left the country with my slight miscalculations and your sleight of hand. I only heard you sigh once, when you thought I was sleeping. We picked up hitchhikers, had children, bundled into that car maps, pillows, water, books, and then I get out and you kept driving. Despite the cracked mirror and bald tires and predictions of tornadoes, you veered off the road, confident the car could make it across the ocean, and it did, the motor of your vision roaring louder, the muffler long gone. Didn't people in the villages complain? Right before you left to move even further away, you came back, broken in a dream. And then afternoon turned into evening. How dead is dead? You know, I loved teaching in Mahone Bay, and then I taught at Dal. I really loved teaching at Dal too, but there were always students in the class who were in trouble. Big trouble. So I'm still in touch with some of them, and I told this young man that I wrote a poem about him, and he was glad. I shared it with him, and he said, things are much better for me now. I'm glad to hear that. To the young poet, you became a street kid, breaking into your own heart as if it were a locked house, the owner asleep or on vacation, shining your flashlight, not to steal, but to find out if it were safe to enter, nights too cold to wander streets. You scaled walls barbed with wire, somehow managing to balance on top before you crossed over. Tagging tunnels moments before the train roared in. Risk was a bridge you crossed because it got you places. Like dragons breaking down walls, it is said of certain ancient poets. No dragon. You hid your fire and entered rooms quietly, crowded or empty, looking for what was concealed behind doors. Young poet rappelling without any harness the daring descent. You knew more than I knew, and I was your teacher. I was brought up in a very strictly atheistic household. It was like the Jehovah's Witnesses of atheism. You could not mention anything spiritual in our house. That was absolutely forbidden. So here are some poems that are spiritual and that do mention the Bible. And I think my parents would be surprised, especially my father. Anyway, here we go. What you hold. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water. You could be that tree that sends out roots. While it is still light, you believe you could be that tree that holds the land in place during heavy rain. You could be water, cross currents, riptides and all, but deep in the ground, clear and cold, keeping trees alive, replenishing as it rises or falls, bends or doesn't bend. Like Atlas, that ancient god who held what looked to you like the world on his back, and all yield fruit in season, even when you don't get the golden apple or the gold, when a morning glory is the glory. Especially then, it's good to know, without and sometimes with grace, that you have held and will hold, not the earth on your shoulders or sky, but for moments at a time and just in time, everything together. And here's another poem. Mentions the Bible. This was on buses in Halifax for Poetry in Motion, in buses in November. Blaze. I believe the commandments. If those I love have left, that does not mean they're not here. The most powerful memories are the ones I don't share. Sky blazing at sunset, fire fall of water, purple rocket bursting roadside, a summer explosion. Oh, love, that you are in the world. Oh, we are all the burning bush. Whether the prophet approaches or not is only part of the story. And the last one, the cool earth. I'm not here yet, but it's what I aspire to be. It's where I aspire to be, the cool earth. Though it's summer, nights grow cold, but the days are good company, risque even. Birds bursting their lungs, bees opening and entering corollas. Poppies, the most fiery flowers, drop petals if I bring them inside. I want to keep the fires burning so I can see in dark corners. Burning helps me pay my respect. Burning helps me homestead the land I've been given. Waste not, I know, but the want not is so tight, I have to untie it. This is what I hope for, to hear sun and shadow as they flood the yards, to occupy even briefly what they slide over, and to translate in my way what doesn't speak. Aside from leaving this undone, I'm not afraid to join my father and mother.